This is The Change Physician, episode 204.
Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of The Change Physician. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my amazeballs co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady. Dr. Cady, how are you today?
I'm great.
And for today, we're going to do a theme here. This is obviously The Change Physician, where we talk about the mindset sort of strategies and things on how do you increase the level of awareness and change your life for the better. But part of that is kind of this looking back on things that have changed you or had an impact. We did an episode on a book. Now we're going to do an episode on the place. So Melissa, let's talk about places that have changed you, and specifically one place that has changed you.
Well, let's just say if you know me well enough, you know which place changed me. So for those of you that don't know, I'll give you a little backstory to it, but New Zealand is the place that I find exceptionally serene and feels like a little bit like a dream. And I have to say, I'll mention all the things that I love about it here soon, but I get asked all the time why I even went there. I mean, a lot of people after the pandemic have heard of New Zealand more because of how they handled the pandemic differently, whether you agree with it or not. And funny is that I wanted to go to Australia and New Zealand after I finished all my training. Talk about this sense of like, I'm done with all my training, freedom, I'm making some money, I can finally afford to go to the place, which, believe it or not, I'll tell you how you can make it much more affordable. Right now, after the pandemic, it's probably not quite as cheap, but you might find deals. But back around 2009, I finished my training. I had already planned on doing a big trip. I met my now current husband and told him what I wanted to do, and Australia and New Zealand were on the plan. And I can't put my finger on it completely, but in the back of my subconscious mind, I've always had the fascination with the platypus or some of the other animals down there. The echidna, by the way, the echidna and the platypus are the only egg-laying mammals on Earth. And so for some reason, I had this interest. I think I like things that are very unique and different, maybe because we all are, and I can say for myself, I'm unique as well. So I think that place kind of drew my attention then, and that was fourth grade, from a book report I did on the platypus. So if you don't think little things change you, they might. You're going to say something? Looks like
I was going to say, so the interest in the book changed you an interest in New Zealand, but how did it change you?
Yeah. So I will say that I just wanted to preface it that I don't really know why, but I went there because it felt like me. And so it changed me because I think it was timing also. It took me out of my routine. And so it made me slow down. And I think the beauty of the surroundings was so magnificent that it just took it to a whole other level. And the culture of the people it's different in America, I can tell you that. We don't make the best names for ourselves sometimes. I found that out the hard way when I was there, but there is a beauty about it just when you look at the backdrop of the country. You can look at any pictures out there. The opportunities to be close to nature in a wild type setting is incredible. In fact, for those of you watching on a video, I'm going to share just the kind of experience that we had. And this is a wild pup seal that came up to us out of curiosity. So that's my now husband. And it was a very curious little pup seal, but it was the coolest experience. It was a little pool of water with 7 frolicking little pup seals that is protected from the ocean waters, about a 5-minute walk in from the shore. That kind of stole my heart right there. But I think it's mainly just the respect for the land, the respect for their elders, the respect for the culture before them. Every place has an underbelly, but I feel like they're doing their darndest to try to honor those that maybe weren't treated as well when the new settlers came in. And so I think there's just an overall feeling of community, responsibility, It's different. Less of entitlement, more expectation of other people to do the right thing, and trying to be responsible social, not just socially, but for the environment. Even when they take down trees, they always replace. Like there's this big forestry kind of plan, and yeah, I think it's the people, the environment, the beauty. There's just the humanity. There's just something different. Did that answer?
Well, and then how did it change you? Because it's an exposure to, there's a couple interesting little things here that I would like to delve into, not in any particular order. Number one is you, I'm writing these down so I can remember them, so this is not too rambling. Mm-hmm. Number one is you discussed leaving where you were, mm-hmm. and the change that was kind of that allowed going a far distance. So I want to return to that mm-hmm. in a little bit here. Number two, then you talked about exposure to nature and natural spaces and how important was to you. And so I'd be kind of curious about that, is because there's the one thing about nature and exposure to nature is there's lots of different natural spaces. So I kind of want to hit on whether or not the natural spaces there were different than some, or what your experiences were with natural spaces in the United States. And then lastly, which I'm going to start number three of the first, is yes, the people, culture, and their respect for the environment. So the exposure to that you really enjoyed, but how did that change you after or during the trip? So how was that sustained, or did you notice a difference for yourself?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind just makes me realize I want to go back. In fact, people are like, why do you keep going back to the same place? Like, why do you keep going to visit your family again, the same place? I don't know. You love it. You love how you feel. How it changed me. I think sometimes those changes are so subtle, it might be hard to put into words, in the sense of this feeling. I think it makes me less tolerant of the stuff I don't like. And it makes me, unfortunately, there's a lot going on in this country, so it makes me question if I want to stay in this country. But when it first changed me, I wasn't in that place. So I think for me, I think sometimes when you get exposed to things, like we say in this podcast all the time, the more you expose yourself to different things, the more you realize what you like. And sometimes you learn the other way too. You realize what you don't like. You see that in relationships a lot, or work, jobs. You realize it helps define who you are, or maybe what you like and what you don't like. So I think it's more about how it changed me in the sense of being more aware of myself and the things that I value and the things that I enjoy. And I know I always loved animals, but I don't think I realized and appreciated the benefits of just being out in nature and being more connected and paying attention to the little nuances instead of just driving through life busy, and slowing down my nervous system. And I think the way people treat you is more calm and less rushed. So I think it makes me feel more at peace. That's all I can say right now. I can tell you a lot of things I like.
Well, but I think there's a difference between liking something and having kind of a changing you, right? And it's obviously this has an impact on your life because mm-hmm. you have returned many times, and we've have discussed that you almost even went there to return to work as an anesthesiologist. I can't remember if we did. I don't know if we talked about that on air. Yeah. But I guess what I'd be kind of curious about then is to hear a little bit about your background, because if this exposure to nature had such an impact, and exposure to people who have some that are culturally different than those in the United States, and maybe in your region specifically, because our country is huge. I think that's something people forget. The United States is massive compared mm-hmm. to many other countries. Yeah. So what were were you exposed to a lot of nature growing up? Like, did you guys go camping, or did you go to non-city places or do a lot of outdoorsy stuff when you were growing up?
Yeah, some. Yeah, I never really looked at that as being something that drew me into some hobby or habit. Or I mean, obviously depends who's with you too. I mean, I love my parents' stuff, but you know, as a kid who's kind of like, once they're independent, sometimes you kind of push away. So I don't think I gravitated to like, oh my God, I didn't recognize that. I don't even think I didn't have enough awareness, Kevin, back then. Like I really, a lot of that I don't remember much other than we did some camping and we had some facilities and I think we had some tents at times, but I don't have a lot of good, I'm not, I want to say good. I just don't have a lot of depth to my memories of that, those experiences. And I guess I have the benefit of being, you know, older and paying more attention.
So well, I mean that can influence. So you're going to a place in New Zealand is well known to be just absolutely gorgeous. Like, yeah. I mean, we just probably do an episode just talking about New Zealand, but like a gorgeous location. But there are people who have grown up with a lot of exposure to natural things. Mm-hmm. And so, but with from hearing a reply where you're like, oh, well, I can't remember, it makes me wonder about where it sounds like the beauty and the natural locations that you experienced in New Zealand were unlike anything that you had experienced prior to it.
Yes, I'd agree.
Okay. Yeah. And then that can obviously change because I know you grew up in Texas and I don't know what size of the community or whatever, but I'm always wondering because I grew up in a small town and I went to big cities, but I'm always kind of curious about the people who grew up in big cities. Like, mm-hmm. What is their actual exposure to these kind of, you know, kind of wild spaces, and what's the first impact, particularly if you see it as an adult? It's like I can't even imagine being an adult and seeing snow for the first time. That has got to be an interesting experience.
Yeah, well, it's novel when your brain is not accustomed to it. I think it might appeal as long as there's no fear associated with it. Yeah, I mean, are you asking me if, because I lived in a big suburb of Dallas. Mm-hmm. Pretty, you know, I don't know, a pretty conservative world. I was always fascinated with people of different religions or ethnicities. And I love just this, like, I'm intrigued by difference. I don't fear it. So sometimes it seems cookie cutter when you come out of a suburb. I had no desire ever to go back. My parents still live there, but I think there's something to that kind of travel. And then you see something so different that it really feels.
And that brings up to two different places because number one, I want to talk about change in location. Again, we're going to come back. We'll maybe end on that one. But number two is these exposure to other people, places, and things, and you know, in a more general manner. So she's talking about specifically about this trip to New Zealand, but how did that change you and your perceptions of where you are now? I mean, you're born in Texas, you're raised in Texas, but you haven't only been in Texas. So how has that changed your perspective coming back to, and you know, when you live on a day-to-day basis in Austin? So how has your perspective changed with this international experience?
I feel like we're spoiled brats. I'm sorry.
Well, no, say it. I mean, then that's because I think what's important is there's these people who wave these little jingoistic flags or whatever. And there are many things I love about our country. There's a lot of things that is really disturbing right now. And we've talked about those a lot on the Saturday Salutations, but, it kind of reminds me, if you have never put yourself in a position to experience something else, like fundamentally experience something else, mm-hmm. being in a different location, being around people who are different than you, maybe you talk different than you, then look different than you, then you have a really poor perspective on what makes things great because it's very limited. So it may be the greatest thing in your limited experience, but that's a limited experience. And so the kind of the hierarchy of how we would use that information to evaluate the overall opinion changes here. And I think that is really crucial to kind of focus on here, because if you haven't been anywhere, then how do you know we're greater than anywhere else? Mm-hmm. Where is that opinion coming from? So so I'm assuming you still have people, maybe friends, family, or whatever, that haven't done a lot of travel. And how are you different from them because of these international experiences?
Well, it's hard to kind of like to with the personality there are personality differences too, so it's kind of hard to like decipher. But people who it's hard for me to grasp now because I feel like I'm not the biggest travel. I mean, I love to travel, but I know plenty of people that travel way more than me into multiple different countries. But I feel like those that have not traveled don't have an appreciation for what they do have. You know, the very things that are not like staring up in the face, like the stuff that they should be very grateful for. I mean, even something as simple as you have 15 or 20 choices for bread, you know, and you go into a store in Australia and you got like a few options, like it depends which city and stuff. But a lot of the stuff that we get is just, we are such a highly consumeristic society. But the people that live here that have not traveled that I know, trying to get back to the question, that's my struggle. I think it's perspective. I think like you said everything about limited, and I totally agree with that, that there's just not an understanding that not everyone thinks like you. Like, and you can have a discourse without, you know, God, you can go into politics conversation here, but there's a beauty to appreciating and understanding that people are very different, and that there's not a level of curiosity, a healthy curiosity from people to try to understand instead of condemning other people because they're so different. So I think there's just an intolerance for people that have not traveled, if they're not open-minded already, or their personality's not like just a naturally curious and happy person. Like there's just something about people that have not traveled, have a limited mindset, a very narrow mind, that's perpetuated in this kind of country. And then with the social media, like you've got to get out of this bubble. And I feel like that's, if I was not already curious and had that desire to know and meet people that are different, I think that would have been the radical change in me. I don't consider it like a radical change in me. I think it just like opens my mind even more to how fortunate the opportunities are in this country. Our country has many problems, but opportunity for the privileged ones are immense. So yeah, I think that, yeah, it's a lack of awareness, a limited appreciation, the inflexibility of some of these people that don't travel because they just have no idea that we as humans, we have so much in common, but how it's constructed in a different pattern. Yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaways.
You kind of make me laugh because you said this kind of being intolerant of intolerance, you know, because that's something that you toss around on social media all the time. Particularly, obviously, I'm much more liberal bent, and you see these people, oh, blah blah blah, and the left is so intolerant. And I kind of feel very similar. But what I'm intolerant of the people who are intolerant. Like, if you're intolerant of other people of class, creed, race, gender, whatever, and you're immediately willing to discount anything in that space, like even to listen to the potential traumas that have been experienced by different people who may not look like you. Mm-hmm. I don't have a lot of tolerance for that anymore. You know, I think so. It's like this intolerance of the intolerant. Mm-hmm. But it is kind of interesting when you travel and you get out of that bubble, how that exposure can change you. And I wanted to add, though, the difference also that sounds like is when you went to New Zealand, it sounded like you were staying locally, you were walking around, seeing the people, you were doing the local experiences. Mm-hmm. You removed the bubble. Like I like that you live in a bubble. If you travel in a bubble, in the same bubble that you live in, you're not going to get any, you're not going to change. You're not going to actually see the flavor. And I kind of think about that in the ways of luxury travel. So there are people who say, oh, I'm such a wonderful traveler, and they've traveled all over the world. But if you're only staying at the Ritz-Carlton and your concierge is managing everything for you, and you were perhaps taking private, whatever transport, or even worse, you know, I have nothing against an all-inclusive resort, but that's the only place that you're traveling. You're basically going to little America, wherever it is. That's not travel in my book. You know, so I like that term that you use, the bubble, because it's like travel that changes you takes down your bubble. And I think that's kind of the key to all of these things. When we talk about things that have changed us, is it pops your bubble or pokes your bubble that you live in, or puts a hole in it, or at least takes it down a minute so that you actually can see that there's something beyond the little reality that you're living in. So very cool.
Yeah, I want to add something to that, because I think of like, if you went in with a big group where you're this herd mentality.
The herd.
Yeah, no, like if you go with the herd, you kind of reinforce yourself and you being right. And this is the right way. And this is like a human issue. I really think and this is my opinion, I think you're most open to change, or most open to really being changed by a place when you're either by yourself or with a very small group, or just I think a traveling partner is great when you don't know the area or whatever. But man, I did take a sabbatical after I got divorced in 2009. And that 1 week away, it was just in the US, but that was kind of like, you're with yourself and you have to engage with these people. You don't have a crutch. You don't have these people to like kind of reinforce your beliefs of this and that, and not be open to what you're receiving from people you don't know. But man, you go to New Zealand and you're just with one other person, and you're navigating this new terrain, this new environment, meeting new people, which is super exciting, in my opinion, meeting new people. And just even the accents, of course, I blame them for having an accent. They said I had the accent. Like, it's super, like that shift right there. It's kind of like, no, you don't have any accent. You got the accent. I'm like, oh crap. I mean, I guess I'm the one with the accent. I'm in their country. So like, there's just so much that you become more aware of when you are almost a little bit vulnerable in a different place. And so, yeah, you talked about being an Americanized kind of like place that's in a bubble. You can rationalize stuff out. You can like it's just, you're not really like pulling yourself out. So
yeah,
I never really thought about that, but there is something really powerful about showing up in a little bit vulnerable in somebody else's land.
So it makes me think of a friend of mine. She'll probably never hear this, but because I went to school with her forever, and we, junior high, high school, college, and the person she is now is never, you would never have guessed it from when we were in grade school. Like you just wouldn't. I mean, she was always nice, but she decided that after college, she wanted to learn Spanish. So she moved to Colombia. Now, this was in the 90s. So Colombia was not as safe as it is now. And by herself. And that was after, I think she spent a year in France, or 6 months in France in an exchange program. But she is a fundamentally, I mean, other than the core niceness, like her core niceness that she's always been, man, her experiences, like who she is, it's just amazing. And the perspective shifts that have occurred. And in a lot of ways, I would say the courage, because of what you said, traveling by yourself. Now the little travel I've ever done completely by myself, I'm trying to think here, was more local. It was in local, meaning the United States. Like you go here or do this, or you're in some program somewhere. But I don't overseas travel, like going to a country where you don't speak the language, and then you're living for a while and you're not around a bunch of Americans and traveling in an American bubble. Man, I have respect for those people. And I know a couple other people have done it too. And on all of them, their perspectives seem to have completely changed. They seem to be much more tolerant of other people. Maybe they're more intolerant of the intolerant, because you do get kind of sick of it. Like the people saying this stuff, and like, you base this, me personally, it's like, you're basing it on what? You're basing it on your opinions, not any sort of actual experiences.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just crazy. But that ability to be vulnerable, I think, in those locations, it does. And I guess if we reflected on the kind of the resiliency thing, if you are building strength, you have to put yourself in a place where you're actually stressing the muscle.
Right.
But to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation in order for you to learn and grow from that. And in a lot of ways, I think travel is a good opportunity for that. And maybe for people who are listening to this, we often try to use it as an escape or a place to relax, and that's okay. But that may not be always the best way to do it. How can you get a little, stress your personal muscle by exposing yourself to these things?
Yeah. Eustress, like you said.
EU, like EUSTRESS.
A good challenge.
Yeah.
Good challenge. Well, and the thing to make, to reinforce that, or to add to that, is that when you're looking forward to something, when you are excited about the opportunity to be somewhere that you've never been, that helps you manage that eustress a little bit better too. So it's interesting. It's like people that want a special cosmetic surgery, they really want the outcome, but man, they're just like physiologically stressed out, because they're like, oh my God, the stress of anesthesia and surgery and all that. It's not quite exactly the same, but I'm just saying that you tolerate the stress because of what you really want. So your why is big enough.
Your why is big enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So my why was, I really wanted to be there, but I wasn't really stressed. But for those of you who've never done international travel for a 15-hour flight, that can be a little bit anxiety provoking. So there is some tolerance of that.
It does change your perspective though on any other flight, for sure.
Definitely. And yes, I am the person doing yoga stretches and walking around on those flights.
Yeah, we've the longest we ever did was 16 hours. And after 12, that's when things got hard. But the coolest thing about it is then when we take like 6 or 7, 8 or 8 hour flight, and it's long.
Yeah.
But it's nothing like
nothing.
It's nothing like those other ones.
Yeah. No, mine. Yeah, 15 hours there with the jet stream, 17 hours back against the jet stream, and on the way back always feels harder. But
yeah,
going back home. So I don't know, it's a combination of variables. But did we hit all those questions on your little list? Yeah,
I think so. I wanted to well, actually we missed one. We want to talk about nature a little bit. And mostly that was a personal interest of mine, just kind of see what your exposure was. Because when you are exposed to nature, there is a physiologic improvement that's associated with it. It is actually healthy to get out in nature. I kind of feel like I had a lot of exposure growing up to nature and spent a lot of time outdoors. I sort of regret that my kids have not had as much exposure as I did. But we hit that because I was kind of interested. It's like where you grew up, and because if you've never experienced nature and then you're flat dab in the middle of gorgeous, I could see how that could be just life changing. Like, and then the second part was the people and the culture. A little bit I wanted to talk about that, where being exposed to different viewpoints, and how their attitudes and beliefs. And then the last one, which we didn't touch on, but I think I'll hold off on another episode. I'll just leave it here as sort of as a cliffhanger kind of a thing, was location, and how distancing yourself from basically your bubble and the opportunities that provides. We've touched on some of them in here, but there actually is some data on that in personal change. So, but I think we'll save that for another episode at another time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So from a nature standpoint, do you want me to hit that, or
if you have anything else that you want to add on to there, you can, but.
Well, I just want to add comment about from a nature experience that there's many different terrains in New Zealand, and There's like sheep everywhere. There's like, did a wine tour by bike, and there's like, went through people's private land, and really just like, literally there's like, you're going through the midst of like sheep and cows and llamas and all this stuff. And really it's really a precious time to be able to do that. And then, we put our car on a little ferry, went across the South Island, and then in South Island ended up doing, I did a dolphin dive, and there was just like dozens of dusky gray dolphins everywhere. And I felt nervous about getting eaten up by a shark, of course, but if a whole bunch of dolphins are around you and frolicking around, you're safe.
Yeah, you're safe.
Orcas could come around, but I felt pretty good. And it was they're so intelligent, and they're fascinated by novelty, which is you humans doing silly stuff. And had the snorkel, and I would dive in with the snorkel and make little sounds and shake around and go in circles. And you could see like 3 or 4 dolphins just looking at you, while you're doing this stuff. And that was around the time I saw that little pup seal too. And that pup seal experience was a kind of a native recommendation. It wasn't part of anything. It's like a free thing to see those pup seals. I paid for the dolphin thing, but man, just so cool to just be part of nature. And yeah, could I get it in the US? But there's a big part of like freely traveling in New Zealand. I don't think a lot of people would appreciate this unless you've been in a relationship with someone that's of color. And in the US, I don't feel comfortable necessarily traveling everywhere in the rural parts of our country because of sundown. If you don't know what this even means, you should go look it up. But like there's areas of speaking of closed-mindedness.
Well, and make sure the thing you were referring to was sundown towns or sundowning towns.
Right.
And they were towns specifically where if you were of color, it was either often written or an unwritten rule that you are not supposed to be in those borders of that town after sundown.
Right. So believe it or not, there are people that don't want you around. Yeah. And I'm just very sensitive to it in the sense that I recognize that it exists, and I don't feel free. I don't feel a freedom. I know there's a lot of beautiful places in this country, but I don't feel free to be me completely in this country, in certain parts of the country, around certain people. And that's the truth of it. And so, for some reason in New Zealand and Australia, there's going to be closed-minded people anywhere you go, but culturally it's not quite as intense with all our slavery and other things that we've had in this past. But in this country,
I'm kind of interested on this. I know we were kind of getting toward the end of the episode. So do you think that is because of your perceptions of being in a new place, that the basically like racism didn't exist? Or do you think it was that you weren't aware of any potential racism that was in the new location because you didn't have that historical perspective that we have in the United States? Because both New Zealand and Australia do have some past issues when it comes to, say, Aboriginal population or the Maori population. So I'm just kind of curious, was it something that you were aware of or not aware of? Because if you don't have that kind of little ticker going in the back of your head, you may not even notice it if it was actually there.
Yeah. Could there be a false sense of security for the new location? Sure. I'm fully, at least reasonably aware about the Maori, the poor treatment of Maori and the Aboriginals and slaughtering of those people, which just, when you really look at it, just everything's the fact that someone's darker than you, like people get slaughtered. If you were a white man, you were safer. I mean, in any country, it seemed like, and for some reason there was this power struggle over people that look darker. But I think that I always believe that there will be people that you cannot trust and you don't know what they're thinking. I've walked in plenty of places with someone I was with before that was much darker, and whether it was real or just a sense of fear, or maybe you don't know why they're looking at you or staring at you. Is it because they like what they're seeing, or is it because they don't like what they're seeing? Like, you really don't know. And so that's you know, when you with someone who's like 6'4" and a very dark person, and you're coming in, you know, trying to make yourself all look nice, and both people are just have a presence, it is hard to distinguish why they're staring at you. And at some point, if they say something, of course you'll know. But that there's the unspoken stuff is really hard on the behaviors. So I think I already have a radar for that kind of weird, like it's hard to explain to people that haven't experienced that. Of course, I'm not someone of dark color. So from just personally just being targeted, it's more of association. I'm sensitive to that. So I think that I'm always going to have that because it's imprinted on me because of historical context in this country. So I think I will always consider it as a possibility, but I don't feel like someone's going to, other than the Christchurch massacre that happened, it is pretty slim chance that there's going to be someone with a, you know, AR-15 going to go slaughter a whole bunch of people because of different color in Australia, New Zealand compared to America. The stats are just skyrocketing here in this country. So my percentages, I feel more at peace in the Southern Hemisphere than in the Northern Hemisphere. I just feel safer. We talk about protection and safety. There's something about down there I feel, and it doesn't mean there isn't atrocities and violence, but I feel like it's, and it could be, I could be in the wrong place at the wrong time and the percentages are extremely low and I'd be, you know, in a bad place. Something bad could happen, of course, but did that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah. No, it was basically about the perception, because there is something we travel someplace new. It may be so new that we haven't, you know, you're naive in that thing. And that can be okay because you just may not have that same experience, but that's, I just think it's kind of important to, because sometimes we may assume that there's a place that's much better than us simply because it's new. Now, on the flip side, New Zealand has obviously made statements about it. They've discussed their past. Mm-hmm. They've recognized their past, you know, something that, you know, some cultures seem to have a great deal of difficulty with, not just the United States, by the way. Mm-hmm. There are other countries have done atrocious things and for whatever reason can't seem to actually own up to them, which
shove it under the rug.
I don't quite understand that. Like if you've actually got historical data and you can see it and you know it occurred, what are you afraid of? You know, why aren't you saying something about that? But anyway, that's something else. Another topic. But all right. So do you have anything else you want to add on how New Zealand changed you?
You know, it's funny when you phrase it like that. I can just say it changed me. But when you try to put your finger on it, it's really a hard task to like say exactly what it is, other than what you love about it. But how did it change you is the harder question.
Well, that's sort of the reflection though. And that's kind of the reasons for this podcast, is because we all have these experiences that change us.
Yeah.
There is aware change and there's unaware change. Unaware change is the stuff that typically occurs that you're developing and things that you are unconscious of the influence upon your life. And those can be either good or bad. But personally, the more that you take like a moment to sort of reflect and see how you have changed, it allows you then to subtly focus your attention on those positive things or look for future opportunities that are similar to it in order to grow. And so that's why I ask these questions. I'm not trying to be cruel or anything like that, but I want to, if we can, the more we can kind of piece out the specifics and kind of encourage this reflective mindset of, okay, I've done this. That was awesome. Why was it awesome? So that we can then in the future be more aware of those awesome things and perhaps even find them in our own neighborhoods. So that's the reason I do that. Well,
I would say I'm a great example to people out there that you can be changed and not really understand what the change is. And it makes you realize how wonderful it is to have a friend like Kevin Cuccaro to help you become more aware of the changes that maybe are happening within you, but you're not acknowledging or don't recognize. There you go.
Yeah, the other thing, or you just get tired of it and say, God, would you shut up and just let me enjoy my life?
No. because I think you need people. I think this is the point. Things will change you. You need to reflect on them because it helps teach you about yourself. But it's also important to have people in your life that help you reflect upon those things. So that's my last comment to take us out.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you very much. That was a very nice comment. So why don't you tell the guests where they can find us if they're interested in more of the Changed Physician?
The Changed Physician, you can learn more about us and the community at thechangedphysician.com. Whether you're a physician or a physician ally, we'd love to see you there as we build this community and share all the different skill sets, strategies, mindsets to help you improve your professional or personal life. So it's more fulfilling. So until our next episode, take care.
Stay well, folks.